Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place where the streets smell faintly of peat smoke, the sheep outnumber the people, and the air is full of strange anticipation. For what else but the most unlikely of village traditions, the annual Turnip Festival. The sky's gone pink behind the crooked thatch rooftops, and you're meandering through a muddy medieval lane where someone's draped bunting made entirely of root vegetables. A minstrel plucks a lute lazily under a leaning oak. Children dart past with garlands of garlic and turnip leaves, and the local baker is already stacking round loaves shaped, yes, like very proud turnips. You probably won't survive this era, of course. Let's be honest. Between the dysentery, the tax burdens, and the alarming frequency of cart accidents, your chances aren't stellar. But for now, you're here to witness something delightfully strange. A whole society that has placed the humble turnip at the center of its seasonal joy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing that little global bedtime map build up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've arrived in a modest farming hamlet somewhere in northern France, probably mid-autumn, around the 1350s. There's mist curling above the pastures and a sense of weary excitement in the air. You trudge past a cluster of wagons unloading this year's harvest. Barrels of barley, baskets of apples, and of course, sacks, heaped and heaving with knobby, dirt-flecked turnips. And not just any turnips. Some of these are as big as a newborn pig. Some are strangely humanoid in shape. One seems to have grown around a forked stick, forming what can only be described as a natural marionette. That one gets pointed at a lot. The festival doesn't officially begin until sundown, when the reeve, sort of like the mayor/tax enforcer/probable witch hunter, gives a speech. But villagers are already prepping, sweeping the central green, stringing lanterns made from hollow turnips with tiny wax candles inside, and practicing the old songs that only come out this time of year. Someone's even tuning a crumhorn, which is medieval for honking goosepipe. There's a logic to all this, even if it seems bizarre. After all, by this point in the year, the hard work of harvesting is mostly done. The root cellars are full, the daylight hours are shrinking, and the long stretch of winter lies just ahead. People need a release, a ritual, something that blends gratitude and goofiness. And turnips, tough and humble as they are, become the stars of the show. You settle on a log near the edge of the square and watch as a troop of children in burlap robes rehearse a short pageant. There's a turnip king with a gold-painted crown made of twigs and a few background dancers portraying the jealous parsnips. It's avant-garde, to say the least. A local blacksmith walks by with a cart full of iron-spiked stilts, apparently for the climbing turnip joust scheduled later. You try to blend in, pulling your cloak a little tighter as the breeze shifts. There's a fire pit smoking gently, and the scent of roasting onions and pork wafts through the square. But it's the smell of raw turnip that's most persistent. If you've never sniffed one straight out of the dirt, imagine wet stone, mild horseradish, and something faintly resentful. A man selling candied turnip slices offers you one. It's sticky, oddly sweet, and vaguely unpleasant, but you nod appreciatively. He tells you the same recipe once won second prize in the County Root-Off of 1324. First prize? A beetroot pudding that made a monk cry, allegedly. Historians still argue whether these kinds of rural festivals were grassroots inventions or imposed by local lords trying to boost morale. Some say the church allowed these events as a release valve for peasant frustrations. Others suggest it was more of a clever tax trick, encouraging abundance celebrations that coincidentally reminded folks to tithe generously. Either way, they happened. There are scattered references across manorial rolls and monastic chronicles. Turnip race was held with great zeal, one scribe noted. Another mentions a contest wherein the prize was a goose most blessed and plump, awarded unto the swiftest root tosser. Vivid. There's a man walking around now with a tall hat shaped like a turnip. It's unclear if he's important or just particularly enthusiastic. You like his energy. A young woman nearby is carving a detailed face into a turnip, lantern style. Apparently, this predates the pumpkin jack-o'-lantern by centuries. Her turnip grins a little too widely. By twilight, the entire square glows with flickering root ghosts and firelight. Drums begin to pound. Not aggressively, more like a heartbeat for the whole town. Everyone's starting to gather, cloaks pulled close, cheeks pink from ale and excitement. You feel oddly warm, despite the chill. A boy slips past with a carved wooden turnip trophy. He's eyeing the adult games with ambition. You ask what the prize is this year. He shrugs. Maybe a chicken, maybe just glory. There's something deeply human about this, isn't there? All this effort for something as unglamorous as a turnip. But that's the point. It's ordinary, familiar. And in a world where the plague might roll through next spring, where crops fail without warning, and winter is always a little too long, celebrating a root that survives the frost feels like hope, even if it smells a bit funny. The reeve finally climbs the central platform, really just two wagons lashed together, and lifts a massive turnip above his head. The crowd erupts in sleepy cheers. It's begun.
The reeve's voice rings out across the square, thick with ale and self-importance, announcing the official start of the festival with a prayer to Saint Fiacre, patron saint of gardeners, bodily ailments, and, somewhat confusingly, taxi drivers in the future. Tonight, though, he's summoned as the spiritual guardian of root vegetables and mud-splattered mirth. The villagers bow their heads, murmuring their thanks for the year's bounty, and you do the same, if only to keep a low profile. A solemn hush settles, and then a goat somewhere bleats with comedic timing, and the spell breaks. Laughter bubbles up, gentle and forgiving, and the turnip games begin. First on the list, the turnip hurl. It's exactly what it sounds like. Participants line up at the edge of a hay-strewn lane, each handed a hefty turnip and a wide stance. The goal is simple: throw it as far as humanly possible, ideally without pulling a shoulder muscle or hitting the ale cart. A wiry woman with surprising upper body strength launches hers almost 30 paces. A slow, respectful clap follows. You edge closer to the sidelines, narrowly avoiding a turnip that skips across the mud like a grotesque stone on a pond. Good arc on that one, someone notes behind you. The reeve's assistant records distances in a leather-bound tally book with an ink-dipped feather quill, which would feel very official if he weren't also wearing turnip earrings. A crowd favorite steps up next, Old Martin, the baker, known for his heroic hurl last year that allegedly knocked a chicken unconscious mid-flight. Martin winds up with theatrical flair and releases. The turnip flies and lands directly in a water trough with a melodramatic splash. "Baptized!" someone yells. Applause follows anyway. Historians still argue whether these games served a ritual purpose, perhaps echoing older pagan rites of fertility and seasonal renewal, or were simply excuses to laugh at your neighbor falling face first into a cabbage patch. Records from the 14th century suggest both might be true. One text from Burgundy mentions a great flinging of roots before Michaelmas, lest the winter spirits find the fields unblessed. Another, more skeptical monk scrawled, "A waste of good tubers and better sobriety." You wander next to the turnip relay, which involves teams of villagers passing increasingly large turnips down a line without using their hands. It's less efficient than it sounds. There's a lot of chin bracing, shoulder hugging, and panicked squealing. By the third round, someone's dropped their turnip into the fire pit. This is considered an offering to the spirits of mischief, and a backup route is quickly supplied. Nearby, an old woman sells pickled turnip slices from a wooden stall decorated with sprigs of rosemary and garlic. You try one out of politeness. It tastes like betrayal, vinegar, and regret. You smile and nod. She gives you a second slice unprompted. A bard strums a tune on a viol, spinning a tale about the 3 turnip sisters who once enchanted a knight with soup so delicious he abandoned his quest. The lyrics are improvised. They rhyme nourish with turnip porridge, which is impressive if not accurate. You settle on a bench made from split logs and let the song drift over you like smoke.
As the firelight deepens and the ale flows, the crowd gets rowdier. The turnip stilts come out, tall wooden poles with flat platforms where feet should be, strapped on with twine and foolish hope. The object is to navigate a path lined with hay bales, overturned buckets, and one very indifferent goat. It's as difficult as it sounds. The first contestant manages 3 steps before toppling gracefully into a patch of nettles. The crowd cheers like he's won a knighthood. A friar walks by, clutching a tankard and humming off-key. His robe is stained purple from spilled beet wine. He nods at you solemnly and mutters, "Turnips save lives, friend," before disappearing into the crowd. You believe him. There's a sense, here in the soft chaos of it all, of something deeper at work. These people, most of them poor, tired, and constantly under threat from everything from war to weather, have chosen joy, in the shape of a root vegetable no less. Maybe because it's simple, maybe because it endures, or maybe because when life feels entirely out of your hands, it's comforting to pretend a turnip toss can influence the seasons. You overhear a debate between 2 farmers about which saint likes turnips more, Cuthbert or Benedict. One insists Cuthbert once ate nothing but turnips during Lent and had visions of angels. The other claims that's cabbage slander. Neither agrees, but they toast anyway. A group of children dances around a maypole that's been retrofitted with dangling vegetables. It's technically not May, but no one seems to mind. A small dog wearing a turnip-shaped cap barks once, as if to declare his allegiance. You sip something warm and vaguely alcoholic from a borrowed mug and let your mind wander. There's comfort in the rhythm of this place. The clatter of wooden cups, the flicker of the torches, the steady thump of drums beneath laughter. It all settles around you like an oversized wool cloak. Fringe accounts from the 14th and 15th centuries even suggest some villages crowned symbolic turnip monarchs, temporary rulers chosen by lottery or contest who reigned over the festival with absurd decrees, like mandating backwards walking or declaring all goats honorary citizens. One German chronicle describes such a king ordering his court to speak only in vegetable metaphors. He was apparently dethroned when someone caught him eating a carrot. The games wind down slowly, like an old song played a bit too long, but lovingly so. The final event of the night is the root parade. Villagers carry their most elaborate turnip lanterns through the village paths, each glowing with a flickering candle and carved with wild, fantastic faces, some smiling, some scowling, some eerily serene. It's a gentle, shuffling procession, like ghosts doing their best not to trip on loose cobblestones. You walk with them, the damp earth soft beneath your boots, the night air thick with wood smoke and laughter. A little girl passes you, holding a turnip shaped like a dragon. You can't help but smile. There's no grand ending to the evening, no fireworks finale or booming announcement. Just people drifting back to their homes, cloaks pulled tight, cheeks flushed with drink and cheer. The fires smolder low, the lanterns flicker out, and the village once again folds into the hush of a countryside night.
By morning, the turnip field looks like it hosted a mild uprising. Bits of ribbon cling to the hedges, muddy footprints crisscross the trampled rows, and one very confused rooster perches atop a makeshift throne from barrels and burlap sacks. You shuffle past it on your way to the village green, yawning and half wondering whether it's been declared regent. In the daylight, the magic of last night's revelry takes on a sleepier, more domestic tone. Women sweep out doorways with bundles of twigs, and a boy in a cap too large for his head solemnly carries a wooden pail of wash water across the path. You step aside for him, and he nods like a man with heavy responsibilities. You find yourself drawn toward the communal baking ovens, where the scent of roasted root vegetables and yeasty loaves fills the air like a warm quilt. Someone hands you a slice of festival pie, a crusty wedge stuffed with turnips, onions, and herbs. It's better than you'd expect, flaky, peppery, and still warm from the coals. As you eat, a nearby group chats about the next seasonal marker, Michaelmas. The festivals never really stop, they just rotate. You can't trust a village with an empty calendar, mutters a man while tying up bundles of thatch. He's not wrong. In medieval Europe, life spun around feast days like a lazy wheel. There were more than 100 official holidays, not counting saints' days, seasonal festivals, or spontaneous community traditions like the Blessing of the Bees or St. Wulfstan's Goose Parade. The Turnip Festival was one of many small, localized celebrations that never made it into royal records, but lived fiercely in oral memory and family habit. In parts of modern-day France and Germany, variations included root carving contests, vegetable dancing, which remains mercifully undocumented, and even matchmaking rituals involving turnips. Young women would offer engraved tubers to their suitors. If he accepted it, a courtship began. If not, she fed it to her pig and tried again next year. Historians still argue whether such customs were born from deep agrarian spirituality or were simply quaint distractions from the relentless grind of subsistence life. Either way, they gave shape to the year, a rhythm as predictable as the frost. You wander next to a low stone wall near the church, where old records are sometimes displayed on festival days. A monk in a brown cowl is unrolling a fragile piece of vellum and weighs down the corners with polished stones. He invites you closer with a nod. The page is an old ledger, yellowed and ink-streaked, cataloging finds and festival supplies from the year of the Great Frost. You trace your finger along the lines. Entries include 2 barrels of ale for spirits and broth, 14 turnips hollowed and hung, and 1 goat borrowed and poorly returned. A scrawled note in the margin reads, "Reminder, no racing the chickens this year, too much blood." The monk shrugs. That was a strange one. A breeze lifts the edge of the vellum. You catch a glimpse of an illustration in the margins, tiny, detailed, and unexpectedly beautiful. It shows a crowned turnip riding a horse, flanked by peasants holding banners. There's a faint grin on the monk's face. Brother Gaspard was fond of little jokes, he says, but some of us think he was recording the truth. Further down the lane, a storyteller perches on a barrel, surrounded by half-dozing children and amused parents. His story? The legend of Turnip Jack, a humble farmer who outwitted a band of robbers using only clever disguises and an overabundance of vegetables. The climax involves Jack posing as a priest to exorcise the robbers' greed, using a consecrated turnip dipped in garlic wine. You're pretty sure the plot makes no sense, but no one cares. You settle on to a nearby bench, soaking in the soft chatter and clatter of village cleanup. It's in these ordinary hours that you start to feel the real weight of history. Not the dates and battles, but the breath between. The way festivals blurred into chores, and chores blurred into legends, until no one quite remembered where fact ended and farce began. There's a fringe account by an Italian traveler from the 1390s who insists he attended a village festival where turnips were worshipped like relics. The people placed them upon velvet cushions and sang hymns in a dialect I could not understand, he wrote. I was offered a slice. It tasted of vinegar and sanctity. Whether he was joking or just very, very tired is up for debate. A soft bell rings from the church tower. Noon. Someone behind you mutters, "Time for the washing." And just like that, the village begins to dissolve back into routine. Stalls are packed up, ribbons gathered. The thrown rooster finally dismounts to general applause.
And yet, despite the return to normal, the echo of the festival lingers. A faint tune hummed by a baker. A discarded turnip with a crudely carved face grinning from the gutter. A toddler waving a stick like a scepter. It's the afterglow of collective silliness, stubborn and bright as lichen on stone. You begin walking again, past the well and the edge of the field, where rows of unharvested turnips still poke up like sleeping trolls. There's work to be done, always. But for a brief moment, the turnips were more than food. They were spectacle, symbol, and centerpiece. And tomorrow, they'll be soup. You follow a dirt path that coils gently away from the heart of the village, past mossy boundary stones and the dry rattle of late autumn hedgerows. There's no rush now, just you, the crunch of frost-bitten leaves, and the memory of that suspiciously regal rooster. You chuckle under your breath. That bird had presence. Out here on the edges, the Turnip Festival feels like a dream you half remember. But even in this quieter landscape, its fingerprints remain. A ribbon tied around a cow's horn, a line of muddy footprints shaped like they came from a child hopping on one foot. You pass a trio of farmers leaning against a broken fence, arguing amiably about which family first started the turnip dance. No one agrees, but everyone insists it was definitely their own great-grandfather. It's hard to say when these customs began. Some say they emerged with the return of more stable harvests after the chaos of the 10th century. Others believe they predate written records, echoing pagan festivals once meant to honor the fertility of the soil. Historians still argue whether these celebrations were direct descendants of pre-Christian rites or simply practical responses to long winters and long memories. You reach a gentle rise where an old stone circle watches over the land like a half-forgotten thought. The stones are squat and weather-beaten, crowned with lichen and gossip. No one quite remembers what they were for. Perhaps ancient ceremonies, or perhaps someone just really liked symmetry. But every year during the festival, a lantern is placed on each stone, and the village elders stand in silence for the length of a paternoster. This moment, quiet, flickering, and oddly reverent, is one of the few that hasn't changed over the centuries. You imagine a crowd of cloaked figures, breath misting in the dark, candles trembling in the wind. There's no speech, no chant, just stillness. Like the turnips themselves are being thanked for surviving another year in the ground. Further down the hill, you spot the remnants of last night's procession of tubers, a strange tradition involving hollow turnips strung with rushlights and carried on sticks. Children parade them through the village like saints' relics with funny hats. The flickering lights are said to keep away evil spirits, or at least discouragingly curious badgers. In one particularly old version of the story, the turnip lanterns were meant to honor Saint Cormac the Root Blesser, a 9th century Irish monk who allegedly converted an entire village using a particularly well-lit vegetable. There's no proof he existed, but then again, there's no proof he didn't, and that's good enough for a village pageant. You reach a half-collapsed shed where an old man, possibly a tinker, possibly just nosy, is carving faces into leftover turnips with a knife so worn it's more suggestion than blade. He offers one to you with a smile, a lopsided grin, 2 triangle eyes, and a single tooth carved too enthusiastically. You thank him, carry it a few steps, and carefully set it on a fence post. A little guardian, watching the fields nap under their winter blanket. As the wind picks up, you tuck your hands into your sleeves and reflect on the odd nobility these humble vegetables have gained. In a society where food security could swing wildly from one season to the next, anything that made it out of the ground deserved celebration. Turnips were the quiet survivors, hardy, versatile, and deeply unimpressed by frost. Unlike wheat, they didn't sulk in bad soil. Unlike apples, they didn't bruise with a dirty glance. And unlike humans, they didn't complain. Of course, their popularity wasn't always a blessing. In some regions, the sheer volume of turnips during winter months led to culinary despair. There's a 14th century French peasant's diary that includes the phrase, "If I eat another turnip, I shall become one." A relatable sentiment, especially after the 5th day of boiled root mash with dried nettles and regret. Still, variety crept in over time. Recipes passed hand to hand, scribbled in margins of salters or muttered across fence posts. Turnip bread, turnip stew, even turnip pudding, with generous amounts of honey and hope. And every region added its own flair. Roasted with cloves and Burgundy, layered with salt pork in Flanders, pickled in brine along the Danube. The thing about medieval cuisine is that it was deeply improvisational. Ingredients changed with the weather, the soil, and the Lord's taxes. If a goose wandered by, great. If not, well, there's always turnip and pretend it's goose. You've got a decent imagination, right? You sit on a flat rock and glance over the fields. In the distance, someone's playing a lute badly. The notes drift through the cold air like birds who lost their migration map. It's oddly beautiful. And you wonder, why turnips specifically? Why not onions or cabbages or something equally humble and plentiful? One theory suggests that turnips, with their anthropomorphic shape and ghost-pale flesh, were naturally suited for transformation. Easy to carve, vaguely face-shaped, and naturally weird. They became little avatars of harvest and household spirits. Another theory? Turnips were simply everywhere, and humans, being the theatrical creatures we are, can't help but give personalities to whatever's nearby. You reach into your pouch and pull out a small keepsake someone handed you earlier, a wax-sealed scrap of parchment with the words "In tubera, lux" scrawled on it. In turnips, light. It might have been a joke, or a motto, or both. You slip it back into your pouch. The wind tugs your cloak as you rise, Turnip Guardian still watching from its perch. Ahead, the path winds back toward the village, where soup simmers, stories swirl, and someone's probably organizing a leftover vegetable joust. And somehow, despite the frost, your heart feels warmer than it should. Maybe it's the pie. Maybe it's the ridiculous dignity of the whole thing. Maybe it's just the turnips. The sky turns that particular shade of late afternoon lavender, the kind that whispers bedtime to the birds and trouble to anyone with unfinished chores. You meander past the village inn, where the shutters rattle with the promise of ale and warmth. Laughter spills from inside, low, rolling, and full of turnip-induced mirth. You catch a snippet of song, something about St. Cormac blessing a stew and accidentally inventing indigestion. Clearly, the bard has been drinking. Behind the inn, down a narrow path lit by flickering rushlights, you find the old storage barns. Their thatched roofs are patched with moss, their doors reinforced against both rats and enthusiastic turnip thieves. This is where the real drama of harvest season used to play out, not in the fields, but in the sorting sheds. Mountains of root vegetables piled like sleepy brown boulders, sorted by size, shape, and suspected attitude. You duck inside one, and the smell hits you. Dry earth, straw, and that unmistakable scent of root cellar melancholy. Even now, centuries later, you can almost hear the echo of gossip. Who's courting the miller's son? Who planted beets in the wrong field? Who claims their turnips grew in the shape of the Virgin Mary? At the back, a wall is blackened with soot from a long-dead lantern. Someone has scratched into the wood a phrase that, translated roughly, means "God grant us patience and butter." A prayer, really, possibly a recipe. Turnips weren't just food. They were currency, dowry fillers, even bargaining chips with the tax collector. One record from 1432 details a man paying off a church debt with 3 sacks of particularly symmetrical turnips. The priest accepted, though he insisted on boiling them before blessing the agreement. You can imagine the smell. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were symbolic acts of humility or desperate negotiations by people who knew root vegetables better than scripture. Either way, it worked. Until someone started using decorative gourds and the whole thing got out of hand. You crouch beside a slatted wooden crate marked with the faded seal of an old manor house. Inside are the remnants of festival decor, braided garlands made of dried stalks and dyed wool, miniature effigies of Saint Turnipus, not canonized but definitely beloved, and a small flag bearing a turnip painted with an alarming number of teeth. The medieval imagination had no brakes. There's a fringe theory, whispered by eccentric antiquarians and the occasional overconfident reenactor, that these barn decorations were once part of a fertility ritual. Something about placing turnip dolls on newlywed thresholds to ensure a bountiful household. No one can prove it, but the idea of a couple being blessed by a smiling root vegetable is oddly comforting. You reach for a dusty ledger tucked behind the crate. It opens with a crack, revealing lists of names, dates, and qualities, evidence of the harvest's highs and lows. Next to one particularly poor yield, someone has scrawled, "Mayhaps the saints are full." A peculiar take on divine disinterest, but not an uncommon one. When famine loomed, people didn't always blame the soil. Sometimes they blamed themselves, or their neighbors, or the pig that looked at them funny. And in those lean years, the Turnip Festival didn't vanish, it just adapted. The dancing was shorter, the pies were smaller, the effigies were less toothy, but it still happened, because not celebrating felt like surrender, and surrender wasn't particularly festive. You lean against the barn wall and close your eyes for a moment. The sounds of the past rise softly. The scrape of wooden rakes, the muffled thump of turnips landing in baskets, the low hum of tired farmers singing to themselves. One song in particular sticks. "O turnip, thou art humblest of thy kin, yet fillest my bowl, my soul, my chin." Not exactly Chaucer, but heartfelt. Back outside, dusk deepens. Crows wheel overhead like gossiping monks. A group of children chase each other down the lane with hollowed turnip helmets, chanting something about the Root King's revenge. You're not sure if this is part of the tradition or just improvised theater, but either way, it's compelling, and probably slightly cursed. As you follow the lantern-lit path toward the commons, you pass a modest wooden plaque nailed to a post. The inscription reads, "Here danced the widow Brunn, who won 3 pies and the mayor's hat." No date, no further context, just that. A story half told, tantalizingly vague. You try to picture her, maybe with flour on her nose, skirt twirling, eyes narrowed in pastry-focused determination. The common green is empty now, save for a few dogs licking at forgotten crumbs. But earlier, it was the heart of the revels. You find faint impressions of feet in the grass, a lone garland caught in a tree branch, and, somehow, a single shoe hanging from the maypole. You don't ask questions, you just nod respectfully at it. In the center of the green stands the festival hearth, a temporary clay oven constructed each year for baking turnip pies and heating spiced ale. It's still warm, a few glowing embers sigh inside. Someone's drawn a smiling root face on the side with ash and a twig. It's the closest thing this village has to a celebrity. Sitting by the hearth, you notice a scrap of cloth peeking from under a rock. You tug it free, an embroidered square depicting a turnip wearing a bishop's mitre, flanked by 2 enthusiastic squirrels. No explanation, just medieval whimsy at its finest. You fold it carefully and tuck it into your sleeve. Who knows, maybe it's considered lucky. As night settles like a velvet curtain, you stretch your legs and glance around. There's something comforting in this cycle of silliness and sincerity, a celebration of survival, stitched together from root vegetables, folklore, and faint absurdity. It wasn't meant to make sense, it was meant to make joy. And in that, it succeeded. The night deepens as you make your way across the green, the stars above now clear and thick, clumped like spilled salt across dark velvet. There's something about an empty festival ground that always feels a little haunted, like the air is still echoing with old laughter and the trees lean in as if listening for the next round. A chill settles on your shoulders, but not unpleasantly. It's that kind of brisk that reminds you to breathe deeper, the kind that smells faintly of cider steam and fire-charred pastry. You drift toward the edge of the commons, where the turnip carving tables once stood. Now only a few tools remain: a wooden spoon, a paring knife with a broken handle, and the carcass of a particularly ambitious sculpture, half turnip, half peacock, all confusion. You imagine the carver midway through, muttering, "This'll show them," before abandoning the attempt and going in search of ale. Turnip carving, though, wasn't just about artistry, it was symbolic. In the minds of many medieval villagers, carving a root was a way of shaping luck. Some believed that giving your turnip a pleasant face would ensure a mild winter. Others made theirs grotesque to scare away the evil spirits that lurked in the hedgerows, waiting for an invitation to sneak into your pantry and curse your grain. Historians still argue whether these practices stemmed from pagan traditions or were simply a case of people getting creative with whatever they had lying around the cellar. Either way, you can't deny the charm of a tiny, gnarled vegetable being asked to ward off the darkness. There's even one surviving manuscript illustration, badly drawn but earnest, of St. Augustine preaching beside a turnip lantern. It's entirely possible the scribe misread the original story, but it's also possible they just had a wicked sense of humor. You pass under an arch of woven straw that once marked the entrance to the food stalls. A tattered sign remains, painted in old dialect: "Roast root and curdle pie, 1 farthing." You can still picture the queue, the excited murmurs, the occasional gasp when someone added a pinch of cinnamon. Turnip pie, to be clear, was not glamorous. It was starchy, dense, often soggy in the middle. But once spiced and sweetened with a bit of late-season apple, it became something almost celebratory, a victory lap for surviving harvest without losing any fingers. The scent of that pie lingers in the collective memory, even if the recipe has long since vanished into the margins of time. One overly romantic friar claimed that it tasted like humble joy kissed by hardship. Realistically, it probably just tasted like turnip. As you walk, your foot nudges a small wooden token half buried in the grass. It's carved with a rudimentary turnip face, smile slightly crooked. Likely part of the festival lottery, a tradition where villagers drew tokens to win prizes: extra firewood, a blanket, or in one memorable year, a goat that turned out to be wildly antisocial. You pocket the token and keep going, your path now lit only by moonlight and the faint, faraway sound of someone still humming a festival tune. It drifts lazily through the air like a memory that refuses to settle. At the far end of the green stands the shrine of the stubborn root. It's little more than a tree stump surrounded by pebbles, but its story is beloved. According to local lore, this was the spot where a particularly large turnip refused to be pulled from the earth. Every villager took a turn tugging it, and finally, in a grand moment of unity and herniated backs, they succeeded, only to discover it had split in half from the effort. Instead of cursing their luck, they celebrated it. They built a shrine, and every year during the festival, people would leave little offerings here: bits of bread, ribbons, or short poems praising turnip tenacity. One entry reads, "O noble root, thou didst defy us all, and thus we crown thee turnip of the fall." French scholars claim the shrine may have started as a fertility altar, while more cynical historians suggest it was just an excuse to drink in public. As usual, the truth likely sits somewhere in the middle, sipping warm cider and refusing to comment.
You rest beside the stump for a while, your fingers tracing the grooves where generations have left their hopes and jokes carved into the wood. A tiny heart, initials, and most intriguingly, a sketch of what appears to be a dancing goat. No explanation, but you choose to believe it was a crowd favorite. A breeze stirs, rattling the dried stalks left over from the day's parade. You imagine the procession, villagers dressed in root-colored robes, hoisting a giant carved turnip on a cart like it's royalty. Children throw petals, musicians play questionable bagpipes. A man in a beat costume trips on a cobblestone, and everyone applauds politely. The procession always ended here, at the stump, where the crowd would gather in a circle, link arms, and sing the turnip hymn. The lyrics changed year to year, depending on local gossip and crop quality. But one line always remained: "Though simple be thy root, thy joy is deep." A clumsy verse perhaps, but deeply felt. Now the stump is silent, the people gone, but the air hums with leftover reverence. You rise and brush off your cloak. Somewhere an owl calls. Somewhere else a barn cat makes an unimpressed noise. And through the stillness you feel it, that odd medieval mixture of absurdity and meaning, of taking something humble and building celebration around it, not because it was spectacular, but because it was yours. And that, perhaps, was the true spirit of the festival. The fields begin just past the shrine, the kind of open stretch where mist likes to linger low across the grass and mice scurry in zigzags from tuft to tuft. You wander slowly, your boots brushing against fallen seed heads, the occasional crumpled petal from the flower garlands scattered earlier by enthusiastic festival children. During the daytime, these meadows would have been packed, blankets spread out, baskets overturned, neighbors shoulder to shoulder in loose huddles discussing weather and weevils. But now, in the hush of night, the space feels boundless, a lull between chapters. You remember someone mentioning the turnip games, not quite sport, not quite ritual, but a little of both. They happened right here in these fields. Events ranged from the surprisingly competitive fastest root dig to the more theatrical turnip toss, in which contestants flung turnips toward a target and shouted insults in Old French for dramatic flair. There was also, famously, the turnip relay, where runners balanced raw turnips on pewter spoons while weaving through barrels and livestock. It was less about victory and more about community chaos. One year, a goat joined in and won. They gave it a wreath of parsley and declared it champion of the humble games. These activities served more than mere amusement. In the tense months following harvest, when food was measured in weeks and every cough sounded ominous, these small acts of levity helped to settle frayed nerves. You weren't just surviving, you were playing, even if the object of play was a lumpy vegetable with dirt still clinging to its sides. Historians still argue whether these games evolved independently in villages or were loosely inspired by Roman rural festivals like the Saturnalia. There's also some evidence that elements were borrowed from Celtic seasonal rites, ritualized digging, for instance, as a metaphor for uncovering blessings. Either way, by the time you arrive in the 14th century, most of France has accepted turnip sport as a legitimate, if bizarre, autumn tradition. You stumble across a trampled ribbon in the grass, its ends knotted around a bit of dried sage. Likely a relic from the tug-of-war teams, each side naming themselves things like the Rooted Ones or Team Tubercle. You imagine the laughter, the strained grunts, the way people pretended not to care who won, then brought it up all year anyway. At the far end of the field stands a peculiar figure, a scarecrow left behind after the festivities. But this one's dressed in mock regalia, a woolen cap stitched with stars, a turnip for a head, and a painted sash reading Duke of Dirt. He's slumped now, slightly listing to the left, as if exhausted by all the revelry. Each year, the Turnip Duke was chosen, part mascot, part jester. Someone would be crowned in the morning procession, paraded around, and tasked with issuing mock decrees. One year, the Duke declared that no person shall complain about the cold without offering the moon an apology. Another time, he demanded that all pies be inspected for turnip content by local nuns. It was harmless nonsense, but joyfully enforced. The tradition of appointing a festival fool has older roots. It mirrors customs found in Feast of Fools celebrations, where societal roles briefly reversed. Scholars suggest it was a way to blow off steam without actually upending the order of things. A controlled chaos with roots in both satire and communal therapy. And beneath all the joking, a quiet kind of reverence. In giving the turnip a crown and a voice, villagers were making room for the absurd to have meaning. It wasn't just a crop,
it was something to laugh with, not just eat. You pause beside the scarecrow and give it a mock salute. Its button eyes reflect just enough moonlight to appear thoughtful. Nearby is the remnants of the fire pit, where last night's coals still hold a trace of warmth. This was where the turnip tales were told, stories half remembered, half invented, of heroic roots and cursed harvests. Children curled under blankets as elders recited the legend of the turnip that glowed in the dark, or the girl who could speak to vegetables but only in rhyme. One favorite, of course, is the Ballad of Bramblejack, a boy who planted a single turnip in cursed soil, only to have it grow to the size of a wagon wheel and roll away during a thunderstorm. They say he chased it across 5 parishes, and when he caught it, it whispered all the secrets of the earth into his ear. He returned, opened a cheese shop, and refused to ever discuss it again. It's unclear whether these tales were born from boredom or deep superstition. Historians point to elements of animism, seeing life and spirit in all things, even vegetables, as a holdover from older traditions. Others argue it was just humans doing what humans do best, making sense of the world with story. Either way, you can still feel the weight of all those words, curling in the smoke and grass like forgotten lullabies. As you move on, a soft fog has begun to settle across the field, wrapping the scattered objects, spoons, banners, bits of straw, in a dreamy kind of anonymity. You tread carefully, not wanting to disturb the quiet relics of joy. There's something oddly peaceful about this emptiness, like the land itself is resting after a job well done. The turnips have been praised, the jokes told, the root deity crowned. Now it's time to sleep. You head back toward the footpath that winds along the river, where the old bridge waits like a tired sentinel. But before you leave the field, you glance back one last time. The scarecrow still stands, the ribbon still flutters, and somewhere, you imagine, a goat is plotting its next race. The river murmurs to you right now, its waters thick with moonlight and leaf shadows, curling gently along the edge of the festival field like an old song remembered. You follow the sound, boots muffled by damp earth and occasional patches of fallen rush. Somewhere nearby, a frog emits a lone chirp. You get the sense he's clocked out for the evening, but still wants to keep an eye on things. Along the river path, small wooden torches, now extinguished, mark where boats had been tied. Not grand vessels, of course, just humble skiffs borrowed from fishermen or coaxed out of retirement from barn corners. During the festival, they were used for the beloved turnip lantern floats, where hollowed turnips, carved with silly or eerie faces, were lit from within and set adrift down the river. Children would line the banks, eyes wide, shouting out which turnip looked like which villager. That one's got Bertrand's ears, or that one's scowling like Sister Eloise. It was equal parts gentle teasing and minor pyrotechnics. Occasionally, one lantern would catch fire prematurely and spin in circles, delighting everyone. This custom of lighting floating vegetable lanterns likely came from a mix of harvest celebration and protective superstition. Fire and water, 2 ancient elements, were seen as purifiers. Sending light along the river symbolized both gratitude for the year's yield and a plea for health through the winter. Historians still argue whether this practice has links to older Celtic Samhain traditions, where carved root vegetables warded off evil spirits, or if it evolved locally through monastic influence and playful reinvention. You reach the old stone bridge now, arched just high enough for a stubborn cart and famously uneven. Local legend says the masons built it on a bet, half drunk on pear cider, and dared each other to lay bricks without a measuring rope. The result is charmingly crooked and creaks in the middle. But it's held, somehow, through floods and frost, and plays its role each year in the ritual crossing. During the festival, it's traditional for couples to walk this bridge hand in hand after the turnip benediction, a sort of vegetable-themed blessing performed at dusk. Supposedly, if you cross without tripping on the bridge's loose stone, and your turnip offering makes it through the ceremony without cracking, you're destined for many winters together. Though what kind of winters is never specified. At the bridge's midpoint is a carved post, notched with the initials of couples going back centuries. Some have been reinforced with iron nails, others faded into the wood like ghost kisses. You run your hand along the surface and feel the ridge of someone's forgotten vow. A common practice among young festival goers was the turnip oath. Two people would carve symbols into a shared turnip, usually a heart, a crescent moon, or occasionally a chicken, and then bury it beneath the oldest willow along the riverbank. The idea was that if the turnip sprouted in spring, their affection was true. If not, well, perhaps love needed better soil. One recorded incident from 1432 describes a love triangle turned gardening competition. 3 lads, each convinced they'd won a maiden's heart, planted turnips in different corners of the same field. Only one sprouted. Unfortunately, it grew into a grotesque 2-pronged lump that vaguely resembled a bishop's hat, causing much local debate and eventual pie fight. The willow in question is still there, wide-trunked, bent like an old man listening to gossip. Beneath it, the soil feels unusually soft, perhaps from centuries of vegetable emotion. You half expect to hear a heartbeat under your feet. From here, the path splits. One way toward the Abbey garden, the other toward the hill where the Feast of Roots was held. You take the garden route, curiosity tugging at you like a wind-blown ribbon. Along the edge, the herb beds give off a warm, sleepy smell, lavender, marjoram, and bruised sage leaves. A few waxy turnip tops poke from the earth, spared from the feast, likely part of a teaching row for the young monks. You imagine them grumbling about root angles and soil ratios, secretly sketching swords in the margins of their planting ledgers. Monastic gardens weren't just for show. They were centers of study, healing, and diet. The rule of St. Benedict emphasized manual labor, and that included weeding. A good garden was a reflection of divine order. A turnip out of line? An opportunity for moral metaphor. But even the monks couldn't resist festival temptation. Hidden in one chronicle from 1391 is an account of Brother Terence, who carved a turnip flute and played rude tunes from the belfry during the final blessing. The abbot was reportedly furious until Terence offered him a slice of honeyed turnip tart. Peace was restored. Historians still debate whether this tart, described as both savory and strangely compelling, was an early version of a regional pie or an improvised dessert born of surplus. Either way, it secured Terence a new nickname, the Piping Root. You spot a bench near the garden wall, carved with scenes of saints and, oddly, vegetables. One panel shows St. Martin sharing his cloak with a beggar, while the beggar hands him a suspiciously smug-looking turnip. Whether metaphor or misplaced enthusiasm, it's another sign of how deeply the vegetable worked its way into everything. The bench is cool under your legs. The stars above are brighter now, crowding toward the river like curious onlookers. You sit for a while, listening to the slow rhythm of leaves and water, letting the air settle around your shoulders like a borrowed cloak. Somewhere behind you, a breeze stirs the festival field. The scarecrow probably shivers a little. A turnip lantern might still be drifting along the current, its candle a small and stubborn spark. And tomorrow, if anyone asks what you did tonight, you can shrug and say, "I walked where the turnips float and the lovers swear." That's probably enough. The air is denser now, heavier with dew, and the scent of damp earth clings to everything. The garden wall, your sleeves, even your hair. You rise from the bench, not with urgency, but with the kind of movement reserved for people who have nowhere better to be. The path ahead leads toward the Abbey shadow, its outline crisp in the moonlight, hunchbacked and serene. This was always the center of things, spiritually speaking. During the height of the Turnip Festival, the Abbey monks would perform what they called the Liturgy of the Roots. It wasn't as grand as it sounds, mostly a recitation of blessings over the harvest, but it had its own quiet power. They'd sing low hymns under vaulted stone, their voices echoing through cold arches, while villagers outside waited with turnips in hand. One manuscript, likely scribbled by an under-caffeinated scribe in the 15th century, describes this moment as the hour when soil and soul are closest. Whether this was deeply theological or just a poetic way to justify everyone getting the day off to roast vegetables is unclear. You approach the side door of the abbey, which hangs open just a crack, as if inviting one last wanderer inside. The air within is cool and incense-touched. The only light comes from a votive candle, still flickering beside a carved niche. Someone has left a turnip there, small, smooth, and offering a single sprig of parsley like a tribute. The absurdity is oddly touching. This tiny shrine, dedicated to Saint Phocas, the patron saint of gardeners and, some claim, root vegetables, saw a spike in popularity during the late medieval period. People would leave offerings here in the hope of good weather, strong roots, or, occasionally, romantic prospects. One well-documented request from 1474 asks the saint for a husband who smells less of pig. The result of this prayer has sadly been lost to time. Historians still argue whether the Abbey's embrace of turnip-themed rituals was a sincere expression of gratitude or a clever way to attract festival donations. Either way, the monks leaned in. Over time, the chapel tapestries began to incorporate vegetable motifs. Stylized roots twined beneath images of saints, halos woven with beet leaves, sacred hearts bordered by parsnips. Outside, the bells toll softly. Not a full peal, just the marking of the hour, probably the 9th since sunset. You glance at the sky and think, yes, that feels about right. The sound floats gently, wrapping the village in a kind of gentle punctuation. Everything slows a little more. You follow the cloister walk now, a covered arcade open to the garden. Its stone pillars are mossy at the base, and small ferns push up through cracks like forgotten thoughts. During festival week, this walkway becomes the avenue of trials, where villagers can compete in lighthearted games. There's the famous Turnip Balance Challenge, which involves walking this very route while balancing a large turnip on a wooden spoon. Records show that in 1422, a baker named Lisette completed the course blindfolded while singing a hymn. Her prize? A pair of wool socks and a mildly impressed goat. The goat's opinion was not recorded, but contemporary illustrations show it standing somewhat aloof.
You pause by one of the carved benches tucked between the arches, imagining the roar of laughter and gentle scolding as someone inevitably drops their turnip mid-stride. The sound would bounce off these stones like warm bread bouncing off a sleepy table. It wasn't all silliness, though. Some events took on a strangely solemn air, like the naming of the champion turnip. Each year, villagers brought their finest specimens, polished to a shine, and laid them on embroidered cloths. The biggest or most beautifully formed would be named, blessed, and paraded through the town on a wooden sled, often accompanied by music and applause. In one year, the winning turnip was dubbed Sir Reginald. Notably, the title came with responsibilities. Sir Reginald was placed at the high table during the feast and later buried in a small, dignified ceremony. Whether this was satire or superstition, no one quite agreed, but the children took it very seriously. For weeks after, they'd leave tiny offerings by the turnip's grave, bits of crust, beads, petals, hoping the spirit of Sir Reginald would bring luck to next year's crop. As you stroll toward the apothecary garden, tucked beyond the cloister's far end, you catch the faint scent of dried angelica and tansy. The monks here kept careful records of which roots cured which ailments. Turnip poultices for swelling, boiled leaves for mild fevers,
One entry even claims that grated raw turnip rubbed on the scalp could ward off melancholia, or at least make your hair smell interesting. There's also the famous, or infamous, turnip tonic, a fermented beverage consumed only during the festival. Brewed with honey, cloves, and a splash of pear vinegar, it was said to bring visions if consumed at twilight. The visions reportedly included singing frogs, helpful ghosts, and once a cheese wheel that delivered unsolicited marriage advice. One friar's margin note in a 15th century recipe book reads simply, "Delicious but untrustworthy." You reach the edge of the apothecary wall now, where the path veers back toward the village square. Behind you, the abbey rests in silence, its rituals paused until morning. In front of you, the village yawns in quiet contentment. Even the frogs seem to have dozed off. And above, the stars remain indifferent, blinking their slow Morse code across the heavens, perhaps wondering if humans will ever truly understand turnips, or anything really. You press on, following the path past shuttered shops and quiet doorways, your footsteps softened by old straw and damp stone. A hanging sign creaks lazily in the breeze, shaped like a sheaf of grain. Maybe tomorrow it'll swing harder, argue with the wind, try to announce itself to passersby. But tonight, like everything else, it's at rest.
A breeze drifts in from the fields now, cool and just a little wet, like it's brushed its fingers through the dew before reaching your cheek. You follow the sound of water, and soon the village well comes into view. Moss-ringed, sunken with age, and laced with ivy like an old story being reclaimed by its ending. This well, once the central gossip hub of the village, became something else entirely during Turnip Festival week. Locals called it the Whispering Bucket. Not because it whispered back, though one tipsy miller in 1459 insisted it did, but because of the way it amplified and echoed voices during the week's strangest custom. Vegetable confessions. Yes, vegetable confessions. You would lower a turnip tied with ribbon into the well, whisper your misdeed into the shaft, usually something mildly shameful like sneaking extra butter or skipping vespers, and then pull the turnip back up. It was thought the water would absorb the sin and the cleansed turnip could be buried, completing the cycle. Whether this was invented by a bored cleric or a guilt-ridden cook is unclear. Historians still argue whether it functioned more as playful theater or a sincere communal ritual. Regardless, it caught on fast. Soon, villagers began composing little songs to accompany their vegetable confessions, some of which survive in local manuscripts. One fragment reads, "Forgive me, root, for nibbling thrice, the pie not mine, yet oh so nice." You sit now on the well's low wall, smoothing the damp stone with your palm. Someone has left an old ribbon trailing from the pulley, a frayed thing the color of faded plum. It flutters slightly in the breeze, performing its own kind of private pageant. Beyond the well lies the baker's square, and though the ovens have long gone cold, the memory of warmth still lingers in the stones. During the festival, this space transforms into the turnip court, a mock trial staged in full theatrical absurdity. A stuffed turnip dressed in a smock and bonnet is accused of various crimes: theft, laziness, having shifty eyes. Local children serve as judge, jury, and frequently overzealous guards. The verdict is always dramatic, the sentence whimsical: banishment to the woods, a dunk in the trough, or occasionally being baked into a savory pie and served with much ceremony. You might think it's all just a game, and yes, it is, but it also reflects something older, deeper, a medieval impulse to give everything form, voice, and consequence. When the world feels uncertain, sometimes it helps to put your fears on trial, even if they're shaped like root vegetables. A scribe from 1398 wrote of such festivities. The people laugh, and in laughing, soften the sharp edge of winter. It's not hard to believe. You can picture it now, the flour-dusted apprentices, the ribbon turnip perched on a wooden throne, the village elder squinting sternly and declaring, "This root has shown no remorse." The mock trials were often followed by dances.
Slow, stomping ones that made the dusty square rise in little clouds, feet pounding in rhythm to hurdy-gurdy and drum. Candles in clay pots lit the way, and someone would always bring too much mead. The turnip on trial often ended the night wearing a flower crown and tucked into someone's basket like a sleepy guest. Nearby, you spot the old counting house, a squat, timbered building now draped in quiet ivy. During festival week, its door is flung open, and inside, a flurry of bean counters and scribes tally the turnip harvest. They track every detail: length, weight, number of bumps, possible resemblances to local nobles. It's part contest, part obsession, part satire. One parchment from 1471 reads, "Turnip number 402, bulbous, defiant, marginally resembles Prior Henry." You step through the creaky archway, peering into the darkened interior. Dust motes drift lazily through moonlight slats, and the great abacus still hangs on the wall, its beads stuck stubbornly mid-count. The festival once crowned a grand turnip archivist, responsible for keeping these records accurate and, more importantly, entertaining. It's said that one such archivist, Beatrice the Younger, invented a whole system of root-based astrological signs. Born under the sign of the curled top, you were destined for diplomacy and a touch of flatulence. A full belly turnip? Beware of goats, but you'll likely marry well. It didn't stick, obviously, but it made people laugh, and laughter, like roasted garlic, was in high demand during festival week. Outside again, the street narrows into a shadowed alley, cobbled and slick. You imagine the line of costumed revelers that would parade this way, wearing capes stitched from old grain sacks and masks shaped like carrots or parsnips. One mask still hangs above a doorway, faded orange felt sagging gently. Its button eyes give it a mournful expression, like it misses the party. The alley opens suddenly into the dye yard, a square rarely used except by weavers and colorers. But for one day during the festival, it becomes the root rainbow. Here, vats of natural dye, welled yellow, madder red, woad glue, are used to paint turnips in brilliant, impractical hues. Children carry them around like lanterns. Some are carved like grotesques, others left whole, tied to poles and waved proudly like ridiculous banners. One record from 1502 details a boy who entered the contest with a turnip dyed in 7 layers. The effect? A sickly brown. He won anyway, for effort and narrative ambition. As the wind rustles again, you picture the glistening rows of colored roots steaming slightly in the morning sun, the smell of vinegar dye and wet earth, the excited squeals and proud parents, the absurd joy of it all. You walk on, past the dye yard, the counting house, the alley of masks. The moon is higher now, the shadows longer, but your steps are unhurried. Because in this village, even the absurd has a place. Even the humble turnip can become a moment of delight.
Your path meanders now through the edge of the village, where the houses lean slightly, as if gossiping about your presence. The wind softens, curling between door frames and over lintels, carrying with it the faintest scent of hay and hearth smoke. In the distance, you hear the slow clang of a weather-worn bell, announcing nothing in particular, just time passing, as it always does. This part of the village is home to the apiaries and herb gardens, quiet, sun-soaked spaces where bees drowse and thyme grows in lazy spirals. During the Turnip Festival, these tranquil plots take on a livelier role, the site of the root carving competitions. Picture it, villagers hunched on wooden stools, tools in hand, peering critically at plump turnips as if they're ancient blocks of marble. Children giggle as their carved attempts wobble under their breath. One might attempt a miniature knight, another a fish with too many eyes, or, if ambitious, a full bishop's mitre, complete with tiny carved crozier. Sometimes they paint on details using berry juice and soot ink. The best entries are paraded through the village atop planks carried by volunteers who take their role very seriously. Notably, the 1443 festival included a life-size turnip unicorn, which reportedly scared a goose into the baker's fire. Both survived.
Barely. Historians still argue whether the popularity of carving contests stemmed from pagan harvest traditions or later monastic pageantry. The earliest mention appears in a marginal note beside a psalter in Burgundy. And lo, they shaped the root with joy and not a little wine. Today, as you kneel near an old herb trough, the soil still smells of rosemary and patience. An abandoned carving knife lies rusting under a bench. The bench itself bears the etched initials of long-departed contestants: AG 1477, Mirabelle 1482, WT, and a tiny drawing of something that might be a turnip or possibly a cow with a helmet. Just beyond the apiary fence lies the meadow, and during festival days, this becomes the stage for the Great Turnip Chase. A truly nonsensical race involving adults, children, and livestock, all tasked with retrieving a runaway root tossed from a wheelbarrow and rolled downhill like a greased pig. The turnip is often pre-oiled for maximum slipperiness, occasionally wrapped in cloth and ceremonially blessed by the village bell ringer. Participants chase it across the field, shrieking and slipping in the grass, and whoever catches it earns a ribbon, a modest prize, and the right to sit in the turnip throne for the closing feast. You walk through the meadow now, grass whispering against your shins, the air faintly sticky with wild clover. The field is empty, save for a half-buried wooden sign: "Please return turnips to the parish office." You imagine the bell ringer from 3 centuries ago, squinting as a painted vegetable sails past his head. You wonder if he ever asked for hazard pay. And the throne itself? Not made of gold or stone, but of hay bales and painted crates. A child once mistook it for a compost pile and added a cabbage. It remained there for the rest of the feast. A tradition was born. Beyond the field sits the dye shed, now slumped in retirement, its door hanging slightly ajar. You push it open gently. Inside, a few upturned buckets, a spool of yellow thread, and an abandoned turnip doll with button eyes and a crown of dried mint. The air smells of dust and woad, of things forgotten but once cherished. It was here, under these beams, that festival banners were sewn, lengths of linen dyed in stripes, waves, or animal shapes, hung across rooftops and between trees. One especially enthusiastic tailor once sewed 50 yards of bunting depicting the legendary turnip beast, a mythical creature said to guard the village from bland soups and political unrest. The turnip beast, drawn in glowing manuscript margins, looked like a lion with a radish for a head and hooves made of rutabaga. No one took it seriously, except for a brief moment in 1428 when 3 villagers swore they saw one near the sheepfold. Turns out it was just Brother Alphonse in a poorly tied cape, looking for his walking stick.
Still, it's comforting somehow to know even vegetables can inspire monsters. Your walk takes you next through the old orchard, where plum trees lean like sleepy guards, and the ground is thick with fallen leaves. During the festival, this becomes the setting for root music. Yes, music made with turnips. Hollowed out and fitted with reeds, turnips can actually be fashioned into crude flutes. Some daring players carve string instruments, attaching twine and bits of animal gut. The resulting sounds are eclectic. One 15th century diarist described the noise as somewhere between a goose's sigh and a choir of bees. That didn't stop the performances. Every year, a root ensemble is formed, and the villagers gather to hear the concert. There are duets, solos, even impromptu dances when someone finds a rhythm that doesn't make dogs cry. Applause is always generous. The players are usually tipsy. A few curious monks from nearby abbeys would sometimes attend, furrowing their brows as if judging a theological debate while secretly tapping their sandals. One abbey even tried to commission a full turnip psaltery, but the project dissolved when the roots began to rot mid-rehearsal. Historians still argue whether these root concerts had roots, pun intended, in older fertility rites, or whether they were just a convenient excuse to laugh through the awkwardness of late autumn. As you pass through the orchard, your hand brushes a string left hanging from a branch, a remnant of a turnip instrument maybe, or perhaps just someone's washing line.
Either way, it hums slightly in the breeze, a sleepy note in the quiet night. You pause to listen, and for a moment, it's as if the whole village is holding its breath. The shadows stretch a little longer. The stars blink with anxious boredom. Somewhere, far off, a dog sighs in its sleep. And you? You keep walking. There's more to see, more to remember. As your feet guide you out of the orchard, you cross a narrow footbridge over a sluggish stream. The moonlight glimmers faintly on its surface, revealing bits of leaf, the lazy paddle of a frog, and, oddly, what might once have been a ceremonial turnip bobbing along in quiet retirement. You smile. Even now, the residue of festival mischief lingers like pollen on a spring breeze. Your next stop is the ale barn, which, in festival season, transforms into a sacred space of revelry and fermented speculation. The villagers, already warmed by root pies and outdoor frolics, would gather here in the evenings for the final round of festivities, the turnip toasting hour. Here, amid the glow of tallow candles and the long, slow smoke of the hearth, locals would raise mugs of root beer. Yes, literal turnip beer, a surprisingly hearty if questionably flavored brew, and deliver impromptu toasts to anything and everything. To Sir Gregory, who caught the turnip of glory despite a twisted ankle. To the parson's dog, who did not eat a single carving this year. To the spirit of St. Rumbold, wherever he is, assuming he approves. The tradition, some say, started as a form of community bonding in years when harvests were lean and spirits needed bolstering. Others argue it was a creative way to use up surplus root ale before it turned. Either way, the barn would fill with laughter, clinking mugs, and the occasional interpretive dance, usually someone's uncle reenacting the turnip chase in slow motion. One surviving record, scribbled in the margin of a tax ledger, reads, "Aunt Hilda did declare herself queen of the ale barrel and refused to descend, despite strong petitions from the constable." You lean against the doorframe of the bar now, inhaling the scent of old hops, damp hay, and the faint tang of misremembered lyrics. There's a wooden bench still intact along the back wall. A dented tin cup hangs from a beam on a leather thong, its base engraved with a single word, Fest. Someone cared enough to mark the moment, to keep the memory. The wind picks up slightly, coaxing a low creak from the roof timbers. It's a gentle sound, like a yawn after a long laugh. From here, the path carries you along the edge of the commons, where the festival's final and most solemn ritual unfolded, the planting of the last turnip. This wasn't a spectacle for the crowds or a loud affair. It took place in the hush of twilight, just as the embers of the feast began to cool and the last scraps of bread had been shared. A single turnip, chosen by the eldest villager and blessed with a mixture of rainwater and herbal wine, would be ceremonially planted in the soil behind the chapel. It wasn't meant to grow, not really. The ground was often too dry or stony, but it was a symbolic act, a quiet thank you to the earth, a hope for next year's abundance, and a reminder that even the humblest root had its dignity. Children watched wide-eyed. Elders whispered prayers in dialects half forgotten. And once, famously, a fox stole the chosen turnip before it could be planted. The villagers responded by planting a parsnip in its place and raising a toast to the swiftest thief in Christendom. Historians still argue whether this ritual descended from pre-Christian rites or was invented by a bored monk trying to get out of Vespers. Regardless, its meaning lingered. Even now, as you pass the chapel garden, you can see the small plot, unassuming, overgrown with wild mint and a few stubborn weeds. A rusted sign reads, "Turnip Blessing Plot. Do not disturb." Someone has left a pebble there. Someone else, a sprig of rosemary. Your fingers brush the chapel wall as you walk. It's warm from the day's stored sun, despite the hour. The stones here are old, really old, and have seen their share of knees and shoulders, rain and devotion, laughter, and the occasional hiccup from too much root wine. Inside the chapel, during the festival, a special mass was sometimes held. Not officially sanctioned, perhaps, but tolerated. The theme? Gratitude for humble things. The sermon? Something about how turnips, like souls, grow best in darkness before reaching the light. One tale tells of a priest who compared spiritual humility to root vegetables, explaining that true virtue lies beneath the surface. It was well received until someone dropped a car of turnip that rolled noisily down the aisle and knocked over the collection bowl. Even so, the villagers sang the hymns. They offered up their quiet thanks. They believed, in their own way, that even turnips deserved a place in the sacred order of things. You pass by a small window, its stained glass depicting, not a saint, but a stylized root with golden leaves and a faint halo. It might be a joke, or a parable, or both. The line between the two grows blurrier the longer you walk through this place. As you move away from the chapel and its garden, the village begins to quiet further. The frogs are singing again. A faint drizzle begins to mist the rooftops, softening the air. You pull your cloak tighter. Somewhere, a shutter bangs lazily in the breeze, and a cat pads silently across your path without acknowledging your existence. Typical. In the distance, the festival grounds dissolve into dark outlines. Bunting now limp, stalls empty, the memory of laughter folded up like a linen napkin waiting for next year's use. You realize in that moment that the Turnip Festival wasn't just about a root. It was about rhythm, about giving shape to the seasons, about making meaning in a world that didn't always offer explanations. And maybe, just maybe, about giving people permission to laugh at something ridiculous before winter set in. So you walk on, a little slower now, your feet brushing the earth that has felt every festival step, every race and toast and clumsy carving. And somewhere under that same earth, last year's ceremonial turnip rests, rotted, forgotten, and deeply, beautifully honored. The drizzle thickens slightly as you pass the boundary of the chapel grounds. It's not enough to soak through, just enough to kiss your cheeks and make the stones glisten like polished fruit. The whole village seems to sigh, as if the Turnip Festival, in all its chaotic glory, is finally turning over in its sleep. You follow a winding path now, lined by low stone walls, toward what used to be the communal allotments. And here, our story turns domestic, not toward the revelry or the rituals, but toward the quiet work that made them possible. The planting, the weeding, the annual dance with the dirt that kept this whole turnip-based economy, if you can call it that, alive. You duck under a sagging wooden arch where a sign once hung, its letters now faded by years of wind and gossip. Just past it lies a patchwork of old garden plots, separated by rows of gooseberry bushes and sleepy scarecrows with hats that have clearly seen better harvests. In festival season, these plots were part of a fierce, if very polite, rivalry, the turnip growing contest. This wasn't about bulk. No one wanted monstrous, tasteless roots the size of ox skulls. No, this was about perfection. Smooth skin, tight grain, the ideal teardrop shape, a gentle blush of lavender near the stem. The kind of turnip that would make a saint pause and say, "Well now, that's a handsome specimen." Each household would choose their best to submit, often swaddled in linen or nestled in moss, like a treasure. Judging was conducted by the village baker, known for his impartial palate, and 2 elders chosen by lottery. Bribery was theoretically frowned upon, but hilariously common. One year, the baker was found surrounded by honey cakes on the eve of judging, each with a polite note from a different family. No pressure, but our Margaret did cry while planting hers. The winning turnip was paraded through the village, carried on a velvet pillow, with a small crown perched atop its leafy head. The grower received bragging rights, a ceremonial rake, and, if they were lucky, a kiss from the turnip queen. That's right, there was a turnip queen. Her selection was similarly mysterious, usually determined by a mix of voting, local politics, and sheer enthusiasm. She wore a circlet of braided root and dandelion, and her duties included blessing the racecourse, lighting the bonfire, and, most importantly, keeping a straight face during the ceremonial dialogue of the root, a scripted call and response between the queen and the village fool. One preserved scroll records this exchange from 1472. Queen: "O noble root, what secrets dost thou keep?" Fool: "Mostly dirt, milady, and one confused worm."
You glance now at a toppled scarecrow with a turnip still wired to its neck in lieu of a head. It's half-rotted, hollow-eyed, and yet, somehow, still regal. Historians still argue whether these pageants were direct holdovers from pagan fertility rites or if they sprang from medieval theatrical traditions meant to reinforce village identity. One thing's for sure, they took it seriously enough to codify rules in the village charter. No queen could serve 2 years in a row, no turnip could be entered after the full moon, and the dialogue of the root had to include at least one pun. Further into the allotments, you find a plot still lovingly tended, wild with late summer nettles and marigold, but lined with recent footprints. Someone hasn't given up. Maybe they still plant turnips, just out of habit. Maybe it's for the memory of a grandfather who once won the Golden Hoe for most symmetrical root. Or maybe they just really like turnip soup. You kneel down and run your hand through the soil. It's soft, crumbly, rich with the scent of old compost and the ghost of festivals past. You could grow something here. You could write your name in seeds and see what sprouted. Beyond the gardens, the land rolls slightly downward toward what was once the grazing commons. Now mostly fallow, it still hosts the outline of the bonfire pit, a perfect circle of scorched earth surrounded by blackened stones. This is where the turnip queen ended her ceremonial circuit, igniting the final blaze of the festival. The fire wasn't just for warmth. It symbolized the return of light in the darker months, a nod to the sun's slow retreat and eventual rebirth. People would dance around it, not in wild circles, but in deliberate steps, turning slowly, like the seasons, mirroring the spiral pattern carved into some of the oldest turnip stones. That's right, turnip stones. Small, flat rocks engraved with spirals, stars, and, believe it or not, roots. Some archaeologists believe they were early fertility symbols. Others think they were used to weigh down cloths over bowls of fermenting beer. But the villagers, they said they were tokens of good luck. You kept one in your pocket during planting season and rubbed it during prayers for rain. You pause near the bonfire ring, where a pile of those stones still rests in a neat mound, half covered in moss. You pick one up. It's smooth and worn, its carved lines barely visible. You can't quite tell if the pattern is a root, a sun, or just the idle doodle of someone waiting for their turn at the dance. You slip it into your pocket. The drizzle eases, the frogs fall silent, and somewhere behind you, a barn owl calls once, then disappears into the dark. There's something lovely about the quiet now, about how all the chaos and clatter of the festival has resolved into soft memory and damp soil. You feel like you're walking through a lullaby composed by farmers, fools, and root queens. And just ahead, past the grazing fields, is your final stop for the night, the edge of the woods where the turnip trials were once held. Yes, those peculiar village games meant to test courage, balance, and absolutely no dignity whatsoever. But that's a tale for the next turn in the path.
You follow the path as it narrows, the stones beneath your feet giving way to packed earth and slippery moss. The woods hover ahead, not quite ominous, just very still. Tree branches droop with the weight of drizzle, brushing low like they're bowing to greet you. You duck beneath a bent bough and step into the dark hush of breen. It smells like pine resin and wet leaves. Somewhere, water drips from a high branch with the soft, deliberate rhythm of a monk pacing the cloister.
This, according to ancient village lore, was where the turnip trials began. Now, don't let the word trial fool you. These weren't serious competitions, at least not in the way jousts or archery tournaments were. No one lost a title or got trampled by a warhorse. These were absurd, often muddy contests designed to test your patience, balance, and sense of humor. You step into a clearing where a faint depression in the ground forms a shallow bowl. A few wooden posts still stand crooked in the mud, remnants of what used to be the turnip gauntlet. The premise? Participants carried a raw turnip on a wooden spoon through a winding course of puddles, low branches, and hanging bells. If you dropped the turnip, or if it touched anything, you were sentenced to the stocks, which in this case meant a 5-minute lecture from the village schoolmaster about the agricultural properties of root vegetables. Legend has it, one contestant trained for 3 months with a wooden spoon strapped to their wrist. They were disqualified when it turned out the turnip had been lightly glued in place. Then there was the blindfolded root maze. A burlap sack over your head, a helper shouting directions, and turnips laid out on the ground like stepping stones. If you stepped on one, a group of nearby children would boo dramatically and throw dandelion heads at you. And perhaps the most infamous event, turnip toss. The rules were deceptively simple. Toss a turnip backward over your shoulder, aiming for a barrel about 10 paces behind you. It sounded easy. It was not. Turnips, if you've never tried throwing one, are unpredictable. Their lumpy shapes and uneven weight make them veer off course like tiny, rebellious moons. One participant managed to hit the village bell tower. Another's turnip somehow lodged itself into the neck of a fiddler's instrument mid-song, resulting in a startled squawk and one rather bruised musical ego. Historians still argue whether these trials had deeper roots, pardon the pun, in ancient rites of passage, or if they simply evolved from idle games played during harvest downtime. Some theorize that they served a social function, humbling the proud, elevating the clever, and giving the town's quieter souls a moment to shine by not falling on their faces. But that's a tale for the next turn in the path. You can imagine the laughter, can't you? The shouts of encouragement, the gasps of near misses, the warm, spiced ale passed from gloved hand to hand. It wasn't about winning. It was about watching your neighbor attempt something ridiculous and cheering them on anyway. You pass another old post, this one with a rusted hook where a bell once hung. The prize for completing the trials wasn't gold or glory. It was ringing that bell and receiving a medallion of carved wood shaped, what else, a turnip. Occasionally, someone took it too seriously. In one dusty record, a miller stormed off in a huff after a turnip rolled into a rabbit hole and was declared unrecoverable. His protest letter to the village council included a diagram, measurements, and a demand for a rematch. He was told to calm down and perhaps volunteer for next year's mulled cider booth instead. Off to one side of the clearing, you notice an old log with a slice of flat stone on top, likely the old judging table. You sit for a moment, brush a few wet leaves aside, and imagine the village fool, muddy boots, a crooked grin, holding a turnip up to the sky and announcing, "This one speaks to me. It has ambition." There's something deeply comforting about the absurdity, about a community that devoted serious effort to not taking itself seriously. A kind of humble wisdom woven through it all, like, yes, life is hard. Let's fall in the mud on purpose and call it sport. One French theory even suggests that the trials served as unofficial matchmaking events. Think about it. What better way to judge a potential partner than seeing how they react to slipping in a puddle while wearing ceremonial robes and holding root vegetables? You lean back on the log and listen to the wind thread through the trees, making the old posts creak softly like they're remembering. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the distant tinkle of laughter, maybe even a few ghostly booing children. And somewhere deep in the woods, if village tales are to be believed, there's still one turnip, never caught, never bruised, the perfect toss. It sailed silently into the shadows and disappeared, blessed by the queen herself and said to bring eternal good fortune to whoever finds it. Of course, no one ever has. But maybe that's not the point. You rise again and move further down the trail. The trees begin to thin, the path widens, and just ahead, flickering between the branches, is the soft gold glow of lanterns. Your next stop, the cottage kitchens, where turnip dishes once stretched the limits of medieval culinary imagination. But that's a tale for the next turn in the path. A worn little gate greets you at the edge of the trees, its hinges gently squealing like they haven't been disturbed in centuries. You push through and step into the old cottage row, the village kitchens tucked between crooked chimneys and thatched eaves. Lanterns flicker in the windows, casting golden circles onto the cobbled path. You could almost believe someone's still awake in there, just stirring the embers for one last warm cup before bed. The smell hits first, something earthy, sweet, and a little singed. You've arrived at the heart of medieval turnip cuisine. Inside one of the kitchens, the air is thick with steam. A woman in a russet gown leans over an iron pot, wooden spoon in hand, brow furrowed with concentration. On the table beside her, a pyramid of turnips in varying shapes and sizes. Some are squat and purple, others long and ghostly white. One even has a twin, two bulbs fused at the side like gossiping sisters. Medieval recipes weren't exactly subtle. Turnips were often boiled until soft enough to surrender under the weight of a spoon, then mashed with whatever was on hand: garlic, sage, even bits of stale bread. The result? A humble dish called pottage, which could be thin like soup or thick enough to stand a spoon in, depending on the day's luck. But that's just the beginning. You wander deeper into the imaginary kitchens, peeking into clay bowls and soot-slicked ovens. One cook is experimenting with roasted turnips glazed in honey and wine, a risky combination that might have gotten you labeled either a genius or a culinary menace. Another swears by a strange dish called turnip pudding, which appears to contain, among other things, eggs, nutmeg, and finely ground almonds. It smells intriguing, comforting, possibly illegal. Historians still argue whether these recipes were staples or festive anomalies. Some claim turnip dishes were reserved for lean seasons, the dependable filler when grains ran low. Others suggest they were celebratory, used in harvest feasts when the root cellar was overflowing and creativity became necessity. One monk's chronicle, admittedly more enthusiastic than accurate, describes an entire week of turnip-themed meals served to visiting nobles. Day 1, boiled turnips with black pepper. Day 2, fried turnip slices wrapped in bacon. Day 3, turnip and eel stew. Day 4, turnip tarts. By day 5, apparently, the nobles politely requested a pilgrimage. You crouch by a hearth where a young girl is grating turnip into what looks like dough. Flat cakes sizzle on the griddle, crispy around the edges, soft in the middle. "They're for the dancers," she whispers, as if it's a secret. "Better on a full stomach." You nod solemnly, though you're not sure if she means court dancers or just the village lads spinning wildly on cider-fueled ankles. Out back, you pass a makeshift pantry where turnips hang like ornaments, strung up by their stems. They're tagged with inked names: Bella, Squinter, Sir Lumpkin, as if they're prize livestock rather than vegetables. One is even painted with a tiny face, cheeks pinked from berry juice. "That one's the mascot," someone explains, "eaten last, or never." There's a sense here that food isn't just food. It's story, ritual, bonding. When you peel a turnip, you don't just make dinner. You participate in something bigger, older. Something that says, we've been here a long time. We've seen winters come and go. We know how to feed ourselves and each other. A fringe bit of folklore even claims turnips were once placed beneath pillows to ward off nightmares. Not the most practical talisman, perhaps, but a harmless enough bedtime superstition. Other tales tell of giant turnips grown by monks using secret compost made from the ashes of saints. That one's unlikely, but charming. As you pass another hearth, a boy hands you a steaming wooden bowl. "Turnip surprise," he says. You peer inside. It's a lumpy beige mass flecked with green. You take a cautious bite. It's good, shockingly so. Nutty, warm, with a hint of garlic and something floral. Lavender, maybe? You raise an eyebrow. The surprise, the boy grins, is that it doesn't taste like boiled socks. Outside again, you sit beneath a kitchen eave as a fine mist begins to fall. You think about all the other things these villagers could have celebrated. Wheat, cheese, barley, even pigs. But they chose turnips. Not the most glamorous crop, not the easiest to love. But maybe that was the point. Turnips required patience. They took their time. They didn't pretend to be sweet or fashionable. They were stubborn, humble, and slightly bitter. And in that, they mirrored the people who grew them. Resilient souls scraping joy from hard ground, laughing through frost-bitten mornings, and finding room in their bellies and hearts for something plain but honest. You stretch your legs and glance up at the sky. The stars are back, quiet, steady, watching. You dust off your hands and rise again. Just down the lane, the old village square waits, and with it, the last great turnip tradition of all, the procession of the lantern roots. The rain stops as suddenly as it began. Just a hush of moisture left behind, beating on the mossy stones and glistening across rooftops like candle wax. You follow the curve of the lane toward the village square, guided by the distant murmur of laughter and an occasional squeal of a child chasing something glowing. Tonight's main event is about to begin, the procession of the lantern roots. You arrive just in time to see the first of them appear. Lanterns carved from turnips, glowing with a soft golden light. Some are crude, with jagged little faces and wonky toothless grins. Others are ornate, filigreed like cathedral windows, their patterns casting delicate webs of shadow on the cobbles. All of them are lit from within by tallow candles, flickering against the cool night air. Children carry the lanterns on sticks, parading in a slow loop around the square. A few of the smaller ones hold theirs too close, cheeks glowing eerily with reflected firelight. Parents follow at a careful distance, holding baskets of dried apples and little oatcakes to pass around. Every now and then, a child stops to set their lantern on the ground and poke at it, like they're making sure the turnip hasn't become sentient. The tradition, you learn, is older than anyone can say. Some claim it started as a pagan rite, warding off the spirits of the dead with carved root faces. Others insist it was a purely Christian harvest ritual, meant to honor the humble food that had carried entire generations through winter. Historians still argue whether these lanterns were pre-Christian holdovers, relics of Samhain rites later folded into church-approved celebrations, or simply a medieval example of people needing something, anything, to make the long nights feel less dark. A friar once wrote that the turnip procession was neither sacred nor profane, but wholly ridiculous, though he admitted that the lanterns are often more eloquent than their bearers. You wander among the glowing faces, the gentle warmth of beeswax and singed vegetable skin in the air. There's a rhythm to the procession. 3 steps, a pause, then a turn. It's not rehearsed, just remembered. Passed on the way soup recipes and lullabies are passed. One little boy stumbles and drops his lantern. The turnip rolls, candle still lit inside, coming to a wobbling stop at your feet. You pick it up and hand it back. He grins and thanks you with a nod before skipping off, apparently unaware that he just recreated a medieval metaphor, the return of light from the edge of chaos. Behind the circle, someone strums a lute, badly. You can't tell what tune it's meant to be, but the effect is oddly perfect, melancholy and cheerful at once. A pair of girls dance in slow circles, their lanterns swinging like pendulums. An old man taps his walking stick in time with the beat, mostly to stay awake. At the far end of the square stands a long table, draped in wool and decorated with dried leaves. At its center, one turnip reigns supreme, the champion root. It's massive, easily the size of a small cat, and sculpted into an impressively stern face with a leaf crown. Apparently, each year the largest, best-shaped turnip is carved and honored like royalty. A handwritten sign in crooked Latin proclaims it, Dominus Navis, Lord of the Roots. Below, a second note reads, Do not eat, crown is glued.
Somewhere nearby, a small choir begins to hum. No lyrics, just soft tones, rising and falling like the breath of the village itself. The procession slows, then stops entirely, as families cluster together in gentle silence. The lanterns are placed on the stone fountain in the center, forming a ring of light. You watch as an older woman, perhaps the village elder, steps forward and lifts one lantern high. In a voice more wind than sound, she murmurs a blessing. Not in Latin, not even in French, just the local tongue, thick with old syllables and memory. Something about warmth and protection and good harvests to come. Then, one by one, the lanterns are blown out. Each puff of smoke curls upward into the night like tiny souls released. The square darkens, but it doesn't feel empty. A fringe legend claims that for every turnip lantern extinguished, a spirit is granted rest. Another version says the light helps guide lost travelers, both living and dead, back home. That's the kind of folklore that never quite dies, no matter how many centuries pass. You sit on the edge of the fountain as people begin to drift back to their homes. The square grows quieter with each footstep. Someone wraps a shawl around your shoulders. It smells like smoke and chamomile. You don't know who it was. Doesn't matter. You stare at the last lantern, still glowing faintly despite the damp. It sits alone now, casting long shadows from its carved grin. You could swear it winks at you. The moment passes. A breeze finally snuffs the last light. From here, your path winds toward the hills, toward the cold fields and darker stories waiting there. But for now, the square is safe, still, familiar. And turnips, odd, lumpy, unfairly maligned, have had their moment to shine. You leave the square slowly, the scent of blown-out candles lingering in your clothes. There's a quietness to everything now, the kind that hums beneath your feet rather than in your ears. You can feel the energy of the evening settling like a layer of dust, gently everywhere at once. Your walk takes you beyond the village limits, past the last cluster of timber-framed homes, toward the edge of the common fields. The path here is worn smooth by generations of boots and hooves and carts that creak just as much as you do right now. It's here that the strangest part of the festival supposedly took place, the planting of the ceremonial turnip. You'd heard whispers about it earlier in the day. Children dared each other to dig it up. An old woman said she once saw it cry. Someone else claimed it was buried upside down on purpose so it wouldn't crawl out. The truth? Well, no one quite agrees. Historians still argue whether the practice was purely symbolic, an act of gratitude to the earth, or whether, as some suggest, it was part of an ancient agricultural superstition meant to lock in fertility for the coming season. You spot the mound easily. It's about the size of a bread loaf, ringed with little stones and dusted with leftover petals from earlier festivities. No signpost marks it, but everyone seems to know it's there. The ceremonial turnip, planted by the eldest unmarried person in the village, with a silver spoon. There's even a poem that goes with it, though most people only remember the first line. Planted deep and planted straight, lest winter's hunger seal our fate. You stand over the mound and imagine the scene a few hours earlier. Someone kneeling reverently, cradling a root vegetable like it's the crown jewels. A priest, perhaps, mumbling a half-serious blessing. Children watching with wide eyes, not sure whether to laugh or bow. And beneath the soil, a turnip,
unaware of the symbolic weight it's just inherited. There's something deeply charming about it, this idea of investing meaning in such an ordinary thing. A root that feeds the poor, fattens livestock, and stores well through famine. Not glamorous, but dependable. The kind of food you turn to when everything else is gone. And in medieval Europe, that wasn't just poetic, it was real. Turnips were a survival crop. Unlike wheat, they didn't depend on dry weather. Unlike apples, they didn't bruise in storage. They just existed. Patient, waiting, ready when needed. You sit on the edge of the path, watching mist curl around the grass. For a moment, the past and present fold into each other, like two blankets laid on the same bed. You could be a villager from 1422, nervously hoping the harvest gods are still paying attention. Or someone in 2025, listening to a podcast while sipping chamomile tea in bed. Both of you worrying about winter. In a nearby tree, an owl hoots once, then again. Somewhere farther off, a dog barks in that lazy, non-committal way dogs bark when the world is boring and safe. And it is safe. At least right now. A fringe story you overheard claims that if the ceremonial turnip sprouts in spring, the village will enjoy a year of peace and plenty. But if it rots in the ground, unseen and unmissed, trouble lies ahead. The kind of trouble that starts with a dry well and ends with a bonfire. You can't help but glance at the mound again. Not that you believe in it, but still, you hope they planted it deep and straight. There's a comfort in rituals like these. They don't have to make sense, they just have to be done. In the face of medieval uncertainty, plague, famine, death by goat cart, sometimes burying a turnip felt like the only form of control available. You lie back on the grass and look up. The stars are beginning to poke through the mist now, blinking faintly like they're testing the air. Same stars that watched the first turnip planted, probably. Same stars that watched someone cry over a ruined field or laugh when a bumper crop saved the village. Same stars watching you now, wondering why you're whispering to a vegetable mound. Your breath fogs faintly as the night cools. Somewhere behind you, the village is beginning to sleep in earnest. One by one, the windows dim. The square empties. The echoes of the procession fade until they're no more than a memory stitched into the damp earth. You press your hand lightly to the soil above the turnip, half expecting it to pulse like a heart. It doesn't, but something in you quiets all the same. Maybe the ancients were onto something. Maybe hope, however ridiculous, is best rooted in the ground. Not in temples or kings or promises, but in food, in dirt, in doing the same silly, sacred thing year after year, just because someone once said it helped. You sit for a long while, feeling the grass grow damp beneath you. When you finally rise to go, you glance back once. Still no sprout. Good. Too early anyway. The sky has deepened now, that inky stage where even the moon steps back to let the stars do their slow work. You head down a narrower lane flanked by low stone walls, their tops furred with moss and old lichen. A soft breeze lifts your cloak, or it would if you were wearing one, and you imagine the faint jingle of a cowbell somewhere in the dark. The path takes you toward the outer edge of the commons, where the soil is stonier and less suited for crops. Here lies the resting place of the festival's leftovers, wilted garlands, broken carts, and, most interestingly, the field of abandoned vegetable effigies. You've heard of it, of course. The villagers call it the turnip yard. It's where all the strange, carved turnip faces go to die. By torchlight hours ago, this patch was alive with laughter and mischief. Children paraded their gnarled masterpieces, some smiling, some snarling, a few weirdly realistic. Adults pretended not to be impressed while judging a secret turnip carving contest. But now, it's something different entirely. The field is quiet, a little eerie. Rows of withering turnip heads lie half buried or slumped against one another like fallen soldiers. Moonlight glints off the exposed pulp. A particularly wrinkled one stares up at you with a lopsided expression of betrayal, or maybe gas. It's hard to tell. There's something odd and touching about it, this vegetable graveyard. As if each bulb was given a moment of personality, a brief spark of identity, before being left to compost. Some folklorists suggest this was more than art. They believe it was a ritual of transference. Carving faces into the turnips was a symbolic way to give form to unwanted spirits or misfortunes, then discard them into the earth. A kind of agricultural exorcism. Historians still argue whether the villagers genuinely believed in the magical potential of these root-based effigies, or if it was just another excuse for a harvest-time prank war. But what's certain is that these turnip faces meant something. The care put into each crooked smile or furrowed brow. Someone stood over that with a dull knife and an idea, probably muttering, "No, no, it needs to look angrier." You wander among them now, stepping lightly. One turnip is wearing a tiny crown made of bent twigs. Another's been stabbed with a toothpick sword. Yet another wears what looks like a cabbage leaf as a bonnet. The creativity is relentless and deeply unserious. It reminds you of something important. Even in centuries defined by hardship, people still found time to be absurd. You pause by one particularly large specimen. Its expression is alarmingly mournful, like a Renaissance painting of mild disappointment. You imagine it sighing softly to itself in the dirt, waiting for someone to remember it had dreams once. There's a faint sound then, rustling. You freeze. It's only a hedgehog, or possibly a spectral badger. You decide not to investigate further. These are the kinds of spaces where superstition clings longest, the kind where kids double dog dare each other to spend a night and claim to hear the turnips whisper. There's a tale, of course, about a turnip effigy so convincingly carved it was mistaken for a lost child. The villager who made it supposedly got into trouble when someone tried to adopt it.
You wonder if that one's still here somewhere, maybe resting near the fence line, its button eyes missing, its destiny unmet. Beyond the field, the land slopes gently upward toward the woods. The tree line is black against the deepening navy of the sky, a jagged ink blot on the parchment of the earth. You don't go there, not yet. This isn't a story about forests and fairies. This is a story about turnips, and it's sticking to that theme like molasses on a cold spoon. You sit for a moment on a flat rock near the edge of the turnip yard, feeling its chill settle into your spine. You think of all the hands that touch these vegetables, all the little decisions. Yes, I will give it a mustache, and all the laughter that bubbled up as a result. What a delightfully pointless use of time. And maybe that's the point. In an era when time was rationed like flour, when every hour not spent working meant one step closer to trouble, turnip carving was an act of rebellion, a joyful middle finger raised at the looming specters of cold, hunger, and illness. Because when you carve a silly face into a root vegetable and give it a hat, you're saying, I still have the luxury of nonsense, and I intend to use it. It's hard to stay afraid of the dark when a grinning vegetable is winking at you from the weeds. And even though tomorrow the pigs might eat them or the rain will mash them into paste, tonight they're still here, watching, remembering the festival, witnesses to joy. You lean back and breathe in the cold night air. It smells of trampled grass and extinguished fire. Somewhere, the echo of a festival tune lingers, probably in your own head, but it's gentle, like someone humming through a dream. Eventually, you rise and dust your hands. One last look at the turnip yard. One last chuckle at a particularly confused-looking specimen who, frankly, could pass for your old gym teacher. You leave them to their sleep, their brief stardom over, but somehow you think they don't mind. They were part of something. They made people laugh. And isn't that more than most vegetables get?
You walk on, boots scuffing softly along a path dappled with leaves and moonlight, the scent of smoke and roasted roots still lingering on your coat. The road winds now, narrower and darker, but your steps don't falter. After the quiet absurdity of the turnip yard, even the shadows seem less ominous, more like old friends standing politely just off stage. You're headed toward a place not listed on any village map, yet known instinctively to all, the Hall of Winners. Don't get too excited. It's not a grand building with stained glass windows or roaring hearths. It's a barn. An extremely average, slightly leaning, hay-scented barn. But during festival season, it transforms into the ceremonial heart of the community, a stage for triumphs that would confuse anyone not deeply familiar with the importance of butter churning speed or the tactical skill of cabbage tossing. As you near, the echo of laughter still dances faintly in the rafters. Earlier, this was where ribbons were handed out with tremendous pomp and hilariously solemn speeches. The mayor, wearing what appeared to be 2 turnips tied together as a hat, presided over it all with magnificent seriousness. And what competitions they were! You pause beneath a crooked archway, peeking in. The barn still holds the scent of celebration, hay, cider, and feet. You walk slowly between rows of benches, past a table still littered with half-eaten seed cakes and upturned mugs. Someone's left behind a pair of carved radishes shaped like mice. Another prank, or possibly an offering to the turnip gods. Hard to tell. Hanging from the rafters, limp but proud, are the festival sashes. Fastest pie cooling, best root arrangement, and, most prestigious of all, most regal turnip. You remember the moment it was awarded. A child barely old enough to tie her own apron held up a perfectly round, smooth-skinned turnip, its top adorned with a delicate crown of marigold petals. The applause was thunderous. Grown men wiped tears from their eyes. The pig judge, yes, an actual pig in a frilled collar, snorted approvingly. Historians still argue whether these community competitions were purely whimsical diversions or if they served deeper purposes, reaffirming social bonds, reinforcing values like creativity, generosity, and that uniquely medieval blend of humor and formality.
One thing's clear, the villagers took them seriously. You found a parchment earlier with detailed records of past winners, going back over 70 years. Entire families known for their generational excellence in rutabaga balancing. A controversial disqualification in 1412 involving a suspiciously glossy parsnip. Scandals, traditions, glory. And yet, at its core, the Hall of Winners is just a barn. Wooden beams, dust motes, a wheelbarrow with a questionable squeak. You walk to the front where the trophies are kept. A shelf of hand-painted stones, turnip-sized and roughly inscribed. No gold, no silver, just the satisfaction of seeing your name spelled, almost correctly, by someone with permanent ink smudges on their thumbs. There's a certain intimacy in it all. These aren't Olympic medals or royal decrees. They're love letters to a life that values joy over status, creativity over precision. A place where winning most enthusiastic scarecrow pose can be a life highlight. You imagine yourself holding one of those stones. Maybe yours would read, "Stayed awake the whole time," or "Didn't trip over the maypole once." Modest victories, quiet heroics. The barn creaks slightly in the wind. A loose shutter taps out a rhythm like a sleepy metronome. You settle onto a bench near the side and close your eyes just for a moment. In this space, even the silence feels shared, layered with laughter, music, maybe a sheep bleating faintly in protest at having been shampooed for the prettiest fleece award. Quirky detail. One of the strangest awards given earlier today was Most Convincing Vegetable Haunting. A young lad had hollowed out a turnip, filled it with warm pudding, and then squeezed it just right so that steam puffed out the eyes. The crowd gasped. The priest looked faint. It was glorious. You think about that moment now and wonder if the turnip was proud, or at least slightly smug. Because here, vegetables aren't just food, they're teammates, props, occasional antagonists. The line between dinner and legend is remarkably thin. You stand again, brushing hay from your knees, and give one last look at the wall of winners. These names will be spoken for at least the next few days, woven into jokes and stories until next year's champions unseat them. But even then, the old winners will be remembered. Every village has that one grandmother who brings up her longest rutabaga appeal win at every gathering. You suspect she deserves it. As you step back into the night, the stars blink kindly overhead, and the barn door swings gently shut behind you. You can almost hear a turnip whisper, "Better luck next time." The wind agrees. The road away from the Hall of Winners curves gently uphill, and you follow it with the lazy confidence of someone who knows there's nothing urgent waiting at the end. The night deepens. It's the kind of dark that wraps around you like a soft quilt, velvety, breathable, edged with starlight. Your boots crunch on gravel and old straw. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls, sleepy and off-key, like it's forgotten its own tune. The breeze nudges your shoulder, and you pull your cloak tighter. It smells faintly of bonfire smoke, cider apples, and damp turnip. You're not alone. Not in the spooky sense, this isn't that kind of story, but in the sense that you can feel the presence of the festival still clinging to the village, still humming in the walls, in the trees, even in the shadows that gather at fence posts and low stone walls. The energy hasn't fully gone to bed. It lingers like a guest reluctant to leave the party. You pass a well with a bucket still swinging slightly on its rope. Someone forgot to haul it up, or maybe it's waiting to be filled with morning again. Beyond it, a row of cottages leans toward each other, windows shuttered, the faintest golden glow slipping through a gap in one sill. Inside, someone's likely reading by oil lamp, or more likely already dreaming of winning next year's best vegetable likeness of a saint. Last year's St. Francis turnip was controversial, but undeniably expressive. You walk a little further and come upon the outskirts of the festival field again, the place where, just hours ago, turnips danced, pies paraded, and laughter spilled into the stars. It looks different now, like the aftermath of a dream, real but fading. The banners hang still. The booths are empty. A lone half-eaten honey cake rests on the edge of a wooden cart like it's waiting for someone to return. You take a seat on a hay bale that someone left behind. It's surprisingly comfortable. The field stretches before you, a patchwork of moonlight and shadow. And in the center, barely visible now, is the low stone ring where the final turnip ceremony was held. The turnip benediction, they called it. Now don't panic, no actual vegetables were harmed. It was a symbolic thing, a ritual where the oldest village member stands beside the chosen turnip, offers a prayer to the soil, and thanks the land for its abundance. Everyone lights a candle, they murmur blessings, and then, because this is still a festival, they all sing a truly bizarre hymn about root vegetables finding eternal peace. Quirky, yes, but touching. Historians still argue whether these types of harvest benedictions were originally pagan rites, absorbed and sanitized by the church, or simply spontaneous traditions born of repetition and reverence. Some suggest the turnip itself was once a fertility symbol. Others just think people really liked carbs. Whatever the truth, you witnessed it tonight. The firelight flickering across the old man's weathered face as he raised the turnip like a holy relic. The hush that fell across the field. The strangely moving chant of, "O root most humble." It was silly and sincere and kinda beautiful. You lean back, looking up at the sky. The stars are sharper now. The kind of sharp that makes you feel like you could fall right into them and keep falling forever.
There's no sound but your breathing and the occasional hiccup of a sleepy sheep somewhere in the hills. And that's when you spot it. A single turnip sitting right there at the edge of the hay bale. Round, plump, still dusted with soil. You pick it up, turn it over in your hands. It's ordinary, slightly lumpy, smells vaguely of rain. But for a moment, just one slow, suspended second, you understand it. You understand why these people dress up roots, sing to them, race with them, carve them into saints and soldiers. Because they've chosen, deliberately, to celebrate what is humble, to honor what's overlooked, to say, this too has worth.
There's something healing in that. Maybe, in a world too often focused on crowns and cathedrals, it's the turnip that keeps people grounded, literally and spiritually. You set the root back down, gently, like it's earned its rest. The village behind you is asleep now. The festival is over. But in your mind, you can still hear the echoes. The squeal of laughter, the off-key fiddler, the mayor shouting, "All hail the root," one final time before slipping on a buttered oatcake. You take one last look across the moonlit field. And with that, you rise. The breeze follows you like a sleepy cat, curling around your ankles, urging you home. Your steps grow slower now. The path becomes softer, grass beneath your feet. Night settling deeper around your shoulders like a blanket woven from the hush of resting trees and the exhale of cooling earth. The village is behind you, the festival a memory, but the feeling lingers. That quiet joy, the absurd dignity of people gathering to honor turnips and tarts and 10 cups of cider. The stubborn belief that even small things matter, that a lopsided vegetable can bring a community together, can inspire songs, can hold meaning. You breathe in deeply. The air is cool. It carries the last threads of music, already dissolving into the sky. A rooster sighs in its sleep. Somewhere, a candle gutters out with a tiny sigh, like the world is tucking itself in. And you? You walk a little further, then stop. Here's a soft patch of grass, mossy, quiet, safe. You lie down. The stars tilt gently above you, and your eyes grow heavier with each blink. The wind hushes itself to a whisper. Even your thoughts begin to curl up like kittens in baskets, round, soft, and still. You don't need to understand every tradition. You don't need to win any ribbons. You're here, you're warm, you're resting. And somewhere, deep in the damp earth, turnips grow slow and content, dreaming of parades. Sleep well, my friend.